Welcome to the Call to Farms podcast, a place where we explore the journey of food and farming. From our farm to your table, I'm your host, Tim Ing, along with my wife, Sophie.
Hey, friends.
And we are on a mission to inspire, educate, and connect you with stories from other local farmers and other real food enthusiasts of all kinds in pursuit of true nourishment. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Karson Rippstein. He works for Redmond. He's been working for them for 5 years, and he has worked in both the feed and agronomy side of agriculture and runs his own family ranch. And I am super excited to have Karson here. We've seen him at events. He not only works as a sponsor, but he's actually invited as a speaker as well. We saw him at the Farm Where You Live conference. He's talked about animal and soil health, and we've also seen him on some videos with Annabelle Trades. Karson, it's a real pleasure. Welcome.
Well, I'm excited to be here with you guys today.
We're excited to have you. And as always, we always want to kick off our podcast by asking you what made you answer the call to farms because you have your own ranch. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So that's a good question. So my grandparents had been farming and ranching in Utah since the mid 1800s. So I am from a long line of farmers, but I didn't get to inherit any of my family's ranch. So me and my dad and brother have started a ranch on our own. So I don't know if to call myself first generation or fifth generation rancher, but the reason I do is I love the being close to where my food comes from, and I absolutely love just the learning about land and about cattle and about crops and all that. That's just it absolutely fascinates me. It's what I'm obsessed with. All I think about. I don't read other books or anything unless it talks about cows or grass or farming or something like that. So it's just my obsession almost.
Can you talk a little bit about like how many acres you have and
Yeah.
what are the different livestock you have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our main thing we do is we run a cow calf operation. It's hard to say on acres because we run our cows on public land in the summer, but we run about 120 mother cows. And so that means we probably get 120-ish calves a year. And then on top of that, maybe 20 replacement heifers and some bulls. We sell bulls. And then I farm on top of that probably 100 and something acres that I just raise my own hay on. Yeah, so the grazing land, like I said, it's on public land. If you're not from the West, that might sound weird, but in Utah, majority of the land that you run cattle on is going to be public land, not privately owned land. So that is kind of how we do things out at my place.
Wait, what does that mean then for public land? Does that you have to work with the government? How does
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So it's usually Forest Service, BLM, or state land. And you don't just get to say, "Oh, I want to go put cows there." There's a lot of green grass. You actually have to buy what they call a grazing permit, which was set up a long time ago. There's acts of Congress making it so that's what you do. You have to buy the right to run a certain amount of cows or sheep on allotment, and then you have to follow their kind of their grazing plan. You can work with them. Some, just to be honest, some are great, and sometimes the government can be, you get the right guy in charge, it can be awesome to work with him. And you get the wrong guy in charge, it can be awful to work with him. So that's some of the struggles with it. It can be inexpensive compared to buying grazing land, to buy permits. But with that, the government controls where your cattle are going to be and the grazing practices. It's not controlled by you.
Is it very difficult to apply for kind of like hunting permits?
No, no. So in Utah, it's pretty much a lottery to get the hunting permits on the public land. You just put it in, you put your name in, they put you in a lottery, and depending on how long it's been since your last time hunting, you can draw out, is what they call it. So, usually every 1 to 3 years, you can get a deer tag, and it kind of goes up from there if you get into more trophy type hunting.
I love that you did mention this option because many of my clients who cannot afford, acres upon acres of land and maybe they don't have the option to lease can also look into public land as well.
Yep, yep, and it's they don't create any new grazing allotments really anymore. You just find someone who is selling their permit, and you can buy it. The only struggle is there's a finite amount, so you have to
Mhm.
find the right guy. Like, sometimes it can be hard. I was just very lucky. It just worked out, divine intervention made it so I could do what I do, so.
So, Carson, does one have to buy the land, the property, and then have it butt up next to the public land, or can you own land and then buy a separate permit?
Yeah, you can no, you don't have to have property next to it. So, like, my land is I'm have to truck them in a semi truck 50 miles or so to get to my permit. So we have like a semi come with the big they call it a bull wagon, the big trailer. We load the cows up, go up there, and then we actually just did this on the first on one group of my cows. So me and my dad and my little 7-year-old boy got on our horses, and then we pushed them up to a pond that was maybe 4 miles from where we dropped them, and we just herded them, up to the pond. So, that's kinda
That's
how it works.
that's great. And do you rotationally graze, or is it just so wide and vast that they just kind
It
of
it
open free range?
it depends on the allotment and the range guy. They call him a range con, and he's in charge of deciding your grazing patterns. We semi-rotationally graze. Me personally, I would like to do more intensive, more frequent rotations, but that is against what a lot of people learned in school, right?
Yep.
Like when they went to range school, they learned that you need long durations and you don't want to overstock an area. So it's kind of going against the grain. So I usually don't win my battle with the government on that, but we try to. So especially in the arid West, right? So to run a cow where I just took my cows, it takes 133 acres per cow calf pair for the summer. So it's a large, large area of land, very
Wow.
arid. So the more important thing is I can't densely stock them because there's not a lot of feed. I have to have a long rest period, like 1 year from. So you're in Tennessee, you can go back and graze. In Utah, where we get 5 to 7 inches of rain, you probably only get one chance to graze it each year. And you don't want to graze at the same time. So you kind of go to a different time of year. You don't want to graze this one in the spring every year. Your grasses will become only grasses, you'll get the opposite season grasses that you're grazing. So the main thing we try to do is graze different times a year and hit them for shorter durations and then let them rest longer just because we're such arid environment.
How does fencing work then with that much of land?
Oh, it's awful. It's very expensive. Luckily, the I run on some state land and federal land. The federal government will usually pay for fencing to be put up. And then we're in charge of upkeep. So actually, Saturday, I'm going to go build some fence that's on a border on one of our permits. And then on the state land, we have to pay for it and we just pay for it. One of the cool things, we're actually looking into doing the virtual fencing. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's like a collar that goes on a cow. And so it's built because I can't do electric fence. When you're doing a 5,000 acre paddock, right, or pasture, whatever you want to call it, electric fence, that's not doable. So these collars are based off satellite signal. You put them on the cow, and it's more like have you seen the ones they put on dogs for your
Yeah.
your yard?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very
That's what I'm thinking
similar,
of.
very similar. So we're looking into that. So that might be a way that we could actually intensify our grazing a little more and have more control because like it's very limiting when you're to build a fence, even to split a 5,000 acre pasture. That's 20 grand, that's a lot of money. So we're looking into different ways to do that, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
kinda how the fencing works. It's sometimes the government pays, sometimes but we're in charge of upkeep. Most of it you cannot get to in a pickup or an ATV, so we do it on horses. So we'll go in, I'll put some T-posts on a horse and some wire on a horse, and we'll lead it up and build fence on our horses.
I've actually seen someone in their car with that and just kind of
Oh,
driving through, but way better with the horse.
oh,
Wow.
it's way better. Yeah,
You're a real
it's
cowboy.
yeah, I'm close. My dad and brother are way better cowboys than me.
Well, that's one of the things that we always prepare our clients for is just making sure that you set enough money aside for fencing. That's one of the things if you're going to bring in livestock, so important.
It's so expensive, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things you cannot you can get away with it, but, like, the worst thing you can have is a bad fence, right?
Right.
You first, you'll be the worst neighbor, no one will like you if you have bad fences.
Yep.
Second, you can't do anything because you're always worried about your animals getting out, so
Yep.
fencing, and it's a huge investment, so it
Yeah.
is good to make sure you saved enough money to build your fencing.
So, how does water work for the cows?
So it varies. So I have 2 different places I run cows. One's state land, one's federal land. On the federal land, we actually have a lot of live water, like streams and rivers, just like you see on the mountain. So this is like on the mountain, not a pasture, not like a pasture like you see. It's like a mountain in Utah, and there's live water and there's ponds and things like that. The second one that takes 133 acres for a cow to run, we catch a snowfall in ponds. People either call them ponds or dugouts. So the snowfall comes, we have to use Redmond actually has a product. It's called Pond Seal that you seal the pond so that the water doesn't just leach. And that pond is what they water out of all year. So we have ponds all over, and we build them in a basin so the snow melt comes and brings the water to the ponds.
So
That's
it's a lot of
nice.
clay.
Yeah, so we use the clay as a sealer of the
Yeah.
ponds. Yeah.
Well, so my question is, did you mention how long are these permits for? Because you just mentioned it's quite an investment to get into fencing.
Yeah, so the permit is perpetual. So once you buy it, you own it forever. But they'll what they'll do is, like, I have one that starts May 1st and goes to October 15th. I have another one that starts May 15th to October 15th. Some of them might start July 1st and go to September 1st. So they set the dates that you're there. So you want to, if you have that, you want to ensure you have grazing throughout the other times of the year. I'm actually looking, we're going to be leasing some permit that will be for the winter time. So I'm not having to feed my cows hay. They'll be out on a desert and doing the same thing. So we'll be leasing that. It'll be BLM ground.
Nice. And did you say you also hay some of your property
Yeah,
too?
yeah. So, well,
Okay.
I don't own a lot of property personally. Like, we probably have like 35 acres. And like I said, we're starting, so we do a lot of leasing. If you went back 5 years when I started at Redmond, we probably had like 45 cows, and we've got up to 120, and we maybe farmed 15 acres, and now we're up into hundreds. I do a lot of leasing of ground. Like, I lease a lot of ground. So that's just how,
That's
because I've not been able to afford
yeah.
Utah. It's so expensive to buy farm ground that leasing has so far been my best option.
Are you able to share what are some strategies for
Um,
leasing?
yeah, so some of my strategies, and actually, I'm glad you asked because no one asked me, but some of the first things I did is I took the leases that no one else wanted. So I took small pieces behind people's house. It was maybe 2 acres, and they just wanted me to raise some hay back there, and or somewhere that had bad fence, and then I could say, hey, let's trade my labor for my lease. Let's sign a 10-year note and a 10-year lease, and I will fence it as my payment. So at the end, you have a fenced piece of property, and for me, I have a place I can run stuff, and I can raise hay and then graze my cows. So some of it is starting with that, and then just don't be scared to go ask someone. The worst thing they'll say is no. I have asked a lot of people and they say no, and then I've asked people and they're like, "Oh, that would be great. We're actually, you know, I'll text someone in town and just say, "Hey, it looks like I don't know if you're raising hay on it." Especially older people who are just like ready to be done, and there's, "Hey, please take it over." So, and sometimes they'll even lease it to me for free if I just make it look nice. I've run into some of those, and so I think the main things is start with people, places that are not desirable, and everyone's not going and fighting over corn and soybean ground. You're probably not going to be able to lease that. Go to the river bottom or something and lease that. Start there. And then as people learn, oh, Carson leases property, I've actually had more people now call me. And I've even had to tell some people no because it just is going to be too much hassle. But people now will call me in my area because they know that I'll lease ground. And so that's kind of and you wanna be careful leasing. You wanna make sure you're very upfront and honest, and you set terms, and you say, "Okay, we're gonna be either year to year," or you set how long your lease is gonna be, and you set expectations. Those are all things that make it so you're a good leasee. And so when you're a good leasee, they share it with their friend, and it really helps.
Oh, man. Thank you so much, Carson. Those are
Yeah.
some phenomenal tips. And for anybody who's wanting to get started, or if you've been doing it for a while, we're big supporters for small farmers. And that's really the way forward. And I love that. That's a really great way to share some of the scrappiness with
Yeah.
our folks. So
No
thank you.
problem. No problem.
So, how did you look into soil health? Was that before your work at Redmond, or were you
Yeah.
already kind of naturally?
So this will be interesting. I'll tell you my background a little bit. So, like I said, I grew up on a ranch. My family growing up, my dad and mom, we didn't have a ranch. We had 10 horses or something. We just had horses. I'd spend every waking moment at my grandpa's ranch that was 50 miles away. My mom would be like, "I'm not driving you to grandpa's. You have to find a ride." So I'd call people that drove in between, commuted. I would find ways to be at my grandpa's on the ranch, and I loved irrigating. Back west, we irrigate to grow crops, so I loved irrigating. And then when I got about 12, I started working for a hay farmer, and he kind of taught me some basic concepts of soil health. And then post going to college, which I didn't go to school for, initially, I went to school for business, and I worked in a home decor industry for a while. And then when I knew what colors were going to be in style for the next year, I know I needed to make a life change because that's what when my mom said something about gold, and I'm like, that mom, gold's going to be popular next year. And I'm like, hey, I need to change my life. No, really, it was all I thought about was cows still. I always thought about soil, cows and livestock. And so I worked for a company, it's called Intermountain Farmers Association. I first started working in just as a store warehouse guy, and I really clicked with the animal health stuff. And then they kind of told me, we would like you to manage one of our agronomy centers, which is kind of what I'm not into now, which was taking care of fertilizers, sprays, all that. I managed a whole center that did that. And so at that point, I learned a lot about reading soil tests. I could go look at a complicated soil test, tell you how much N, P, and K you got. And that was what I thought was soil health, was making sure you had N, P, and K, and you put enough glyphosate on it to make sure the weeds didn't grow. That was my background in soil health. And then I met Redmond. I started working for them, and I had a big change of philosophy just because I met people who opened my eyes. I went to shows. And then once I went to Will Harris, I don't know if you guys know Will Harris out at White Oak Pastures.
Yeah, right.
So I went out to his place, and that's when I'm like, okay, I'm no longer doing any of this other stuff that I thought was soil health. I grew up thinking soil health was making sure there was no weeds and making sure it was properly fertilized. And so then after that, I just dove into books and learning. And anytime I can spend time talking to someone about soil health, I just dive in. So you can become someone who knows a lot about soil health pretty quickly if you just put your mind to it and that's what you consume, because nature's not, it's complicated, but in the most simple way, it's complicated. It has like these basic rules that if you follow, things become healthy. And so that's kind of my soil health journey. I know that was a long way, but that's my soil health journey.
No, that's great. I was going to ask you, what was the aha moment that you had with Will Harris? And it sounds like you had other people along the way, but it sounded like
Well,
that trip.
yeah, it was, well, I had a lot of before, but I was like, I'd call it, I was riding the fence between like regenerative soil health practices and mainstream farming. And it was when I was asking him about tillage, and I was trying to tell him, well, there's times I was trying to explain to him why I was tilling something and the boost, and he's like, just that's no, it was kind of just, he kind of made me, I think, I'm like, well, why am I really doing that? And so there was many instances on that trip. And now I'm the weird neighbor who does regenerative type stuff. And I just was out doing I'm getting ready to water my field, which I lease from my wife's grandparents own it, and I lease a little 10-acre field. And I was out there and I turned it from a monocrop alfalfa farm into diverse native pasture grasses. And it's the first year I've turned it over. And I now, when you first start it, there's a lot of weeds. That's just what naturally comes first. It's nature's cover crops. And I was looking at my neighbor's fields that were all planted, all monocrop alfalfa and been sprayed. I'm like, look how beautiful that is. But
Mm.
then I looked at mine and I could see the diversity and the bugs and all the thing and all the little birds that were in my pasture out there compared to what was going on. So it was just cool to see the life difference. The other thing is I've tried doing conventional agriculture and I could not make money doing it. And so I, I
Yeah.
tried raising hay like everyone who had a generational farm. I couldn't do it and make money. It was not working for me. So it was either I switched doing it or I was done raising hay and farming.
What do you
Now, is
do?
that,
Well, because you have so many inputs, when
yeah.
you're doing a conventional farm, I needed a very big tractor. I never had big enough. I have a couple little I farm a couple hundred acres. I never had a big enough tractor to be able to plow. So I'd have to, I'd take forever so plowing, fuel, all those things, the inputs would just kill you. And so I just could not make that pencil out. It's like this year, if you're raising corn or you're raising beans and you look at how much I was watching a YouTube channel, he's like, yeah, we're our 2,000 acres right now. We're suspecting to lose $500,000 this year on our farm. I'm like, how do you go into a year knowing you're going to lose money because commodities are high or low? And so I've cut my inputs almost way down, way down. I put some inputs, not like NP and K type inputs, which I'll probably get into, but I put some inputs on my farm. A lot of it, I went from one farm that I lease. It's the biggest one. It's probably 90 or maybe 80 acres. So I probably farm more than 100 acres. Sorry, I'm trying to gather all of it, but it's probably 80 acres ish. And that was the one I first started doing a lot of like soil health stuff. And I've now got my yields probably triple what I was doing when I started, which was monocrop alfalfa, and I was putting a lot into sprays and chemicals. And now it's pretty much I put money into cover crops and then some Redmond soil amendments and manure. That's what I put my money in. And so it's pretty fixed costs. And like I said, I probably almost tripled our yield off that farm, maybe even more. And that sounds outrageous, but it's true. I could have showed you my haystack from 5 years ago compared to now. It's probably triple what I get now.
Yeah, I love that you shared that by focusing on the soil health and biodiversity, it just not only made good financial sense that you also had greater yield, but can you also share maybe from your personal experience or from the many clients, working at Redmond, the correlation between improving your soil health and the results for people health as well as animal health?
Oh yeah. Well, it's interesting what we do in the soil is exactly what we do in human health. So in human health, if we find out we're not being healthy, what do? We usually go to the doctor and he tells us, "Oh, we need to take a pill with magnesium and we need to take a pill with some zinc or we need some of this." And then we just continue to have to take that pill our whole lives. We don't actually become healthy. We just try to supplement our way to health. That is the exact thing that we do to the soil right now in conventional agriculture is instead of saying, okay, why could my grandpa farm this place without any inputs? He put manure on it every year. And now, person running my grandpa's farm doesn't put NP and K on it. All of a sudden it falls apart. It's because we're trying to supplement our way to health in our soil, just like we try to do it in human health. Really doesn't make a difference. All we're doing is like putting band-aid every year that's one day going to have to be ripped off. We just keep putting this band-aid on when you're actually working with nature and things are healthy. All of a sudden you see things like bugs disappear. You see things like, okay, I have a couple weeds, but I don't have like a weed that's going to take over, and pretty soon my pasture is going to be strong enough that the weeds are gone, because weeds are just fixing some kind of problem or being a cover for something that happened there. So all these things just that you had to have inputs for then go away. And then you're like, well, what do I do with all my time now? Because I don't have to go spray this field. I don't have to, I don't have to go, do all these other, I don't have to plow. I don't have to disc. All I have to do now is go plant some cover crops or spread some Redmond on or some other natural things or manure. It's crazy how much better it makes it. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's good. I want to hear what your secret is to tripling your yield.
So that's really good. So the ground that I farm is really heavy clay. Okay, very heavy clay. I mean, it was so we have a pivot. Do you guys familiar with a pivot is? What a center pivot is? It's a little thing that goes in circle that's like a sprinkler system for a farm. So we had a center pivot. We had some, I think it was a barley planted there that we were going to turn into hay. And we were farming it, and it was literally droughting out when we were watering it every day because the ground had become so hard panned that the water would just run off it. So one thing that I've done, the only thing that I do any tillage on is I use what's called an aerator, which is just like you would do an aeration of a lawn. I do that once a year, and it's just because I'm in heavy clay. I would not recommend it in any other soil than extremely heavy clay. So that was one. Second thing is I stopped putting like phosphate. The big thing you put on alfalfa is phosphate. I've stopped doing that, and I've started using the money that I would put into phosphate on like cover crops and like Redmond, our soil products. So those are the things that I invest in. So instead of and then not worrying about weeds, because what I've found is when I plant cover crops in the fall into my hayfield, what happens is the spring I have this huge flush and I have my hay and then the cover crop coming. I can take a crop and then my hay crop will come back the same. And I didn't have any weeds because the cover crop outcompeted the weeds. And it's so diverse. And I'm seeing things that weren't growing there are all of a sudden starting to grow there. And when I say triple my yields, I want you to understand the yields were awful when I started. It's not like I went from good to very, very good. I went from atrocious to acceptable, and my next step is to get to good. Okay, I want that to be clear.
Yeah.
I didn't go from like amazing soil. It was like because I always go to these things and I talk about soil health, and people always say, well, I have heavy clay, so it won't work, or I have sand. All soil types you can work with. You just got
Yeah.
to learn how to do it. But I went from awful to better. So it wasn't great, good to great. So that
That's yeah, that's great though, Carson, because that baseline is so low being in that extreme clay that, I think it's encouraging to know that you can come back from that. We get a lot
right,
of people who are like, "Oh, can you check before I put in the offer for the home to see if it's clay soil?" And if it's clay soil, they don't want it, right?
right.
But like it's encouraging to hear from what you're saying that yeah, you can work with and that's what Tim and I talk about too. It depends on what the organic matter and all the amendments that you put in there to build up the soil health. But yeah, it's encouraging to hear that from you, especially coming from an area with such extreme clay.
Yeah, so over the last 4 years, I went to where I couldn't if I had my knife and I went to the soil and I tried to stick it in, it would probably bend my blade before I got all the way in. Like it was almost cement. And I can now stick it's I last year, me and my dad, we stuck our finger in the soil this far with just our finger. It seems like not impressive, but we were so excited that our finger went if you can't see, if you're listening, like an inch in the soil. That was like such a big deal for us because that meant the soil structure was improving. So, and it wasn't because I went and tilled it is because I used nature, I used natural practices, good soil health principles to start that.
Yeah, we were visiting one of our mentors and she took her spade fork and just tossed it into her garden bed. And the whole spade went through, and my jaw just dropped. I'm like so jealous.
Yes. And you could do it. When I went out to, you mentioned I was on Ann of All Trades channel. I went to her farm and she is in heavy clay. Like if you go outside of where her garden is, it is like heavy clay. I go to her garden and you can just stick your hand down past your wrist into the soil. It's because she's using compost and she's using natural practices.
Yeah.
She's learned what soil health, everything's covered all the time, and she's got beautiful soil. She turned awful clay into beautiful soil.
Yes, Anne's a good friend, and she
Oh,
took us
good.
on a tour too, and it was just great. She uses the traditional natural farming practices like K&F.
Yes.
That's something that we love as well.
I love that you mentioned that too, because I was recently interviewed on the Rural Rich, and they asked like, "What do you look for in land? You look for the soil health," and I said, you can always amend the soil, especially with the Redmond products." So that's
Yeah. Well, the crazy sometimes the land that you can afford is not the one that has the greatest organic matter, or, like
mhm.
I can't go out and buy the most premium farm ground. I couldn't rent the most premium farm ground. Like I couldn't lease it because people were willing to pay more and they'd been there forever. I had to go to the stuff that was extremely heavy clay, and I had to go to stuff that was not desirable. That's how I made it work.
So you also mentioned the Redmond soil products. Is there one in particular that you recommend for soil clay, or taking the soil test first?
Well, so I'll kind of go down that road. I hope I answer your question. Tell me if I don't, okay, when I go down this. So we have three products for soil. Actually, four. If you want to go into like what we conventionally have used, I'll kind of tell them what the product is and then kind of if that makes sense. So we started using our products on soil probably, I don't know when it was, 20 or so years ago. And the reason is because we sell to a lot of Amish dairies, okay, because they love natural and it works, so they love our product. And we had people who were like, "Well, it works really well in our cows. Let's throw it on our soil." And they saw great results. So they were putting what is called SR50, which is just salt and clay, which is a different type of clay. Not all clays are the same. So when I say clay is clay, every clay is completely different. I could spend a podcast talking about how clays are different. But so it's our conditioner, which is a volcanic clay, completely different than most farm ground. Okay, you put those on, and what they were seeing is all of a sudden, if they were taking feed tests, their relative feed value went up. If they were looking at their bricks levels in their grass, the bricks levels shot up. And as we started testing it, we saw things like the beneficial bacteria and the soil biome like lit up. All of a sudden, we had a whole bunch of activity going on in the soil, which is what you want. Most of the time, what's wrong with our soil is it's dead. There's nothing going on there. When the bugs are going and nature's working and the protozoa and the bacteria are going, things just work. So, what it pretty much does is it gives a spark to the soil, and it will also help with CEC, which is cation exchange capacity. That's the ability for things to move around in the soil. So, those are the two things that we were seeing. So, we really have loved that product. We've been using that for 20 plus years on lots of acres. I sell it to people who have thousands of acres of farm and they put it on their whole farm, and they're very happy with the plant quality increases, and then they see the beneficial bacteria and the beneficial protozoa come to life. And they've also seen things like, okay, I had a whole bunch of grasshoppers, but now the bricks in my grass is up, so the grasshoppers went away. Things like that. That's what happens when your soil's healthy. But SR50 is more like if you have 1,000 acres or you need full totes of things, that's something you'd use. If you're looking to more like I've got a garden or a small pasture, we have a couple products. One of them is called Mineralite Build. So that one is our salt and our clay, and then we add another volcanic mineral called that has really high in sulfur and other minerals that our clay is a little shorter in, which we've just seen another boost upon what was happening in SR50. Life was coming up, the soil health was improving. And then if you don't have any nitrogen, like if you don't have access to nitrogen, you're growing a little garden in the back of your apartment in San Francisco or something, we do one that's called grow, and we put a little bit of chicken manure in because the one thing that you will usually be short on is nitrogen. So SR50 and build and grow, we none of them are really fertilizers, they're amendments. So you're not going to see large NP and K numbers. So things that you want to put with those is like I'm putting my compost out, then I go put this stuff out. Okay. So you're probably not going to use it alone. You want to use it with like compost, manure, liquid fish, bone meal, whatever you've got for natural nitrogen sources, and then those products. And so, how I delineate which one you should use, if you have natural compost or manure, use build. If you don't, use grow. Okay. That's simple as it is. Build is when you have your own natural compost or manure. Grow is when you don't because it has chicken manure in it.
And anybody who gets on these products and starts off on like raw land and land that we just talked about that may be less desirable, can they
Mhm.
eventually taper off on these products, or
Yeah,
is it
I think
completely?
you that's a great question. We've had people using it for a lot of time, like 10 years, and still seeing great results. But I think it kind of depends on your budget and your goals. So you could, like for me, I don't go put it on every acre every year. I selectively go with what I'm really working on. So like this year I have a little piece that I'm going to be putting on 10 acres. When once I cut it, I'm going to go put some more on 10 acres. So I don't think you need to put your whole place every single year, you know. And it also depends on how much you're using it. A garden is probably a place where you want to put it every year because gardens, you're pulling up so many micronutrients, you're pulling up so much all the time. You probably want to supplement it every year. A pasture or a hayfield where you're actually grazing and you're putting manure back out, I'd say if you do it every other year or you do it for a couple years and then you need a break, then do it. So I don't have like a yes, do it this many years and don't do it this. Pay attention to your ground and see what's happening.
So, Carson, just to clarify, do you recommend the SR50 and the build for pasture and hay fields, and the gardens would be using the grow?
Yeah, you can use all of them. Like, you could put grow on a pasture hayfield, but most people who have a hayfield or a pasture have their own manure. So, we've sold it to a farm, and he put it on 300 acres. And you can also put build an SR50 on your garden, but that's only if you're putting manure or nitrogen on your garden in some way. Does that make sense? Does that clarify it, Sophia?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
got
good,
it. Yeah,
good.
that's great to know. So, like for our gardeners, I we could recommend grow, and then for us, because we do use manure, uh, what do we call it? Moo poo.
Yeah. There you
So we
go.
can use the SR50 and the mineralite build.
Yep,
So, yeah.
perfect. Yep.
And
What
is
are
it just as simple as, do we need to measure it? Is there a certain way to apply
Um,
it?
if you have a pasture, you would probably want to get like depends on the size of the pasture. You might want to get it to where you have, if you have a small pasture, you can use a push cart, like a Scott's push cart, like you do on the lawn if it's a small pasture. Or you can get if you have a tractor and a small pasture, they have those little red cone spreaders. And on the bag, it tells you how bulk density, and you just go off, okay, I've got 10 acres, 2,000 pounds. I want to put 200 pounds the acre. So I'll adjust the bulk density. But you're shooting for like on the grow because as chicken manure about 300 pounds, usually depending on rain, but about 200 pounds on SR50 or build on per acre. That's on an acre of ground. So if you need 1 acre, you probably don't want to go buy a 2,000 pound tote. That's more like if you have 10 acres, but that if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
we sell it in 5 pounds, 25 pounds, and totes.
Okay. And is this something that we apply at all at once for grow, the build, and the SR50, or should we slowly introduce them into the soil for either the pasture or hayfield or the backyard gardener?
I would just do it. I just do it all at once. Usually the best time to do it is in spring at green up or fall but this is what I'll tell everyone. As a human race, we are innately great. We're so good at putting things off. So if you're thinking about it, just go do it. So if it's summer, go do it. Like it's fine. It's not going to cause a problem. Like our problem is we're not like putting out nitrogen that's going to get hot and burn or evaporate. Like, just go do it right now because most people will be like, "Oh, I'll do it later," and then they never do it. At least I'm talking most people. That's me. So I have to do it now. So
You're talking to me. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay,
I like
that's how I
well,
roll.
Carson, in your position, do you often hear any success stories from the clients that are using the products? And if you can elaborate a little bit more on the best practices, like, for example, gardeners, do they let the field rest then for a season before applying the Redmond products?
No, no. So what they'll usually do, the best practice is just get it and put it on whatever time of year. Like I said, spring is the best. So if you had a pattern is to every spring get some, put it on, and it'll tell you how much to put on the bag. I can't remember square footage and all that. That doesn't fit well in my brain. So I have to think about it. But so the best practice is put it on and then implement it with all the other soil health practices, keeping your soil covered, making, all your other natural soil health practices. Just implement this as a spark. This is not going to be a fix all. It's a spark of life to the microbes in the soil. Okay. Think of it as that. So, best practice is probably just put it on whenever you are able to, and then don't overthink it. That's what we do in guard. Sometimes we just like overthink things, and then because we're overthinking, we do nothing. So don't overthink it. Put it on when it's available. And I hope I answered your question.
That's great. You did. You did. So
Okay.
we're all about sustainable regenerative agriculture. That's what our values are in. Can you tell us more about Redmond Salt's approach to sustainability in their harvesting and production processes?
Yeah, yeah. So just to give you a backstory, how Redmond started, we actually started in '58 by some farmers in a drought that were not able to make their living, and they knew there was salt like 20 feet below the surface. So they just started mining the salt. And in the beginning, it was all for agriculture salt. So, for instance, my grandpa in the '60s would drive his little old dump truck over, and they would just pull up with the loader bucket and break salt off and put it on in the truck. And that's what his cows always got. But now what we do is it's an underground mine, and if you actually go to our facility, we're very we have to do very little damage to the landscape. We're not in a very beautiful area. It's really heavy clay and nothing grows, but we try to use as most natural practices and everything. We actually Redmond ourselves, we own our raw milk dairy farm, which is right next to our mine, which we sell direct to consumer. We think we milk 100 something cows and sell raw milk. We raise some pigs out there, which we use the milk and stuff with. So the owner of Redmond, actually, his passion, like he's been into like Weston A. Price stuff, all that, well before a lot of people. So a lot of our practices are natural and like working with nature. We don't add any chemicals or anything like that. Our salt comes directly from the mine to either your plate or to the bag that it's going to go in for your livestock or the soil.
That's awesome. And we love your salt because it is unrefined in the US, as clean as can be. I do want to talk about you and I have talked about this several times. No, one time several months ago,
Okay.
but I would love to have you explain the difference between someone who wants to buy ag salt versus human salt. And I know that there are some price differences between ag salt. So there might be some people who will feel like, well, it's all coming from the same
Right.
mine. Can I just buy the ag salt?
Right. That is actually a very good question, and we get it all the time, especially from people in this space who are so good at being price conscious. So the ag salt and the human salt come from the exact same mine. Okay. The ag salt, because we use so much more of it than human salt, is done by a blast. So we use ammonium nitrate to do a blast, and so it's harvested with that. Human salt is done with blades, and we grind it off the wall, so there's no blasting to it. Okay. Then the human safe stuff is actually put in a completely, it comes out of the mine in big dump trucks. The human safe one, the human salt actually comes up in like stainless steel, and it goes completely through a human's grade facility. The ag salt is not. It's not like it's a lesser product or not clean. It is just not gone through a human safe facility. Okay. The other thing is FDA standards on salt. So FDA, if you notice, our white salt, our table salt's a little more whitish looking than our animal salt. The reason is the FDA says, okay, you have to have 90, I think it's 6 or 7% sodium chloride, which is salt, and only 4% other minerals. And the where we mine that, we try to find veins that have that within our salt deposit. So that's where the human salt comes from. The ag salt will be more like 93% salt, 7% other minerals. So if you ground it up, it's going to be quite a bit more gritty than the human salt. I'm not telling you can't do that. I just wouldn't recommend. I'm not. It's not gone through a human safe facility. It's not like it's bad in any way. There's nothing wrong with the animal salt. Like if my boy licks the blocks or the salt all the time, and I have no problem with it.
It might
But it
make
has
you
not
stronger.
gone through a human safe facility, if that makes sense. Just to be very clear.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And you did invite us out there
yes.
for me to play with the blast site,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. So you can come out and shoot the dynamite. We try to have a lot of fun. We're kind of, like our company is very much, we were just having a meeting today and we're like, and everyone's like, well, the reason we connect with homesteaders is because most of us are homesteaders and farmers ourselves. And so, if you've met most of us, that's what we're all into that. And so when we do our mine tours, we do take people out and we shoot dynamite and it's super fun for no other reason than it's fun. So,
No, thank you. We're looking forward to it.
yes, it'll be a lot of fun when
Yeah.
you guys come
And
out.
we'll see you at the Modern Homesteading Conference. So I'll have to
Yes.
just map how far Idaho is from Utah. But if it
Yeah.
makes sense, it'd be fun
Yeah.
to come stop by.
It would be. Well, we're the modern homesteading. We're like I'm in southern Utah, they're in northern Idaho, so we're a ways away at that one. But one of your trips to California or something, we're actually probably closer. So I was just in Southern California. I was only like 8 hours from LA, and we'd probably be like 14 hours from you at modern homesteading. So it's like
Oh,
Oh,
different ways. So kind of like my friend who lives near Sacramento, I'm always like, "Hey, I'm going to be in California. How close are you?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm 14 hours." I'm like, "Oh, I'm closer to LA than you are." So it's like sometimes but yeah. So, but we'd love to have you out. It's a really good experience.
that is so fun. I would look forward to that very much.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
I am not one to shy away from controversy.
Okay.
And there is something that I've heard, and I just want to address it. But what is it that you can tell me about lead content in Redmond salt?
So lead content in Redmond salt. Okay. So I'm not a scientist, so I can't like go into all the details, but I will tell you this. If I was going to have lead-based paint, it would be bad for me because it is man-made and lead is bad for you in man-made things. Okay. When you're using natural products that God kind of has formulated, there is lead in our blood, right? There is a certain amount of lead that is actually in our blood. There's a certain amount of everything in our blood. So I couldn't tell you. I have tests. I could tell you, but I'm not going to go try to find my test to tell you how much lead or how much anything is in there. And if you're eating them in a natural product like this, you will have zero problems with lead or any other things like that. You'll have a lot more problems from a refined product than you'll have because when you're in nature, soil has a lot of lead in it. You go to the soil, it's got a lot of lead in it. You eat a tomato, there's going to be some lead in it. But the difference is it's natural, right? When nature does it, it's just completely different than when it's done by something formulated by man. If that makes, I hope I made that simple, but
I completely understand, and I think
yeah,
that's great that I could hear that answer from you. I know that there were some things that were being tossed around, and
right.
before this rumor mill starts, I wanted to hear it from you. I fully believe, as long as it's unrefined and everything is in its natural state, I support that. So
Yeah.
that's great to know.
It's really sometimes we as people and and I'm gonna this is one thing that regenerative and homesteaders and things sometimes we do wrong is we put up these we like freak out about certain things, but when it's in nature we just got to realize nature is there's someone that does a little bit more formulation and is a little smarter than we are, and he's given us products that is going to be balanced and good for us. And if we're just eating balanced, good for us, natural things, our body knows what to do with it. Would I go take a lead pill? No. But would I eat something that's in nature that has a little lead in it? Sure, because it's natural, right?
Yeah.
And I hope I answer. I'm probably not the best one to answer it, but that'd be my response. I don't worry about things in nature like that. So
No, and I think that's a great representation for Redmond salt. What on that note, there's a common misconception with people who think that salt is bad for you.
right,
What are some things that Redmond salt helps to dispel that myth?
perfect. So it's funny that and I've never made this connection. Everyone tells you salt's bad for you, but when you're about to die, you go to the doctor. What do they put in your veins, right? Salt
So,
water,
mhm.
right? They put that in you because sodium chloride is like one of the most important things to our existence. There's so many metabolic functions that come from sodium and chloride. That's why our bodies ran off electricity. Sodium chloride's an electrolyte. Like there's so many things that happen. Salt is not bad for you. When we started thinking salt's bad for us is when we started eating white refined salt so frequently, right? When you're eating white refined salt, yes, your heart rate, you have heart problems. Yes, you have cholesterol issues. When you eat unrefined natural salt, you do not have those issues anymore. Like they naturally go away. Like it's one of those things. Again, your body knows what to do with natural things. When man gets in and screws it up, it's when our body does not know what to do with it anymore. Our body does not. It's example soil health. Okay, I remember when I was working in the agronomy center, our pasture we only had enough manure to do half of our pasture, and so I did half of it that way, and then I did half of it in nitrogen that I bought from the fertilizer place. And I remember going out to that pasture and you could see half of it. Like you could see the difference. The half that I put the manure on, it just had like a lot more diversity. There was a lot more things going on. The grass was dark green. This grass was still tall, but it was like a yellowish, washed out color. And the difference is this is a man made thing that nature does not know what to do with. It doesn't know what to do with this really high amount of nitrogen. It really knew what to do with this manure. So, natural products, nature just seems to take, that's where we can get a little too complicated is realizing that thinking that we're smarter than nature when in theory, nature's the smart one. So,
Right. There's a balance in all of it. Well, that's great. There's a growing interest and maybe because I've written the Nourishing Asian Kitchen cookbook that thank you so much for endorsing and supporting
oh, yes.
our family's book. But I get so many questions about people who are now starting to wake up to the fact that we need to source our food locally and eat more nourishing meals. And Redmond Salt is the first brand that I recommend.
Awesome.
I've also noticed that you have started to introduce other products as well. Tim's
Mhm.
one of his favorite is that garlic salt that he
Oh, it's
just
good.
uses on steak, and it is really good.
Yeah.
So, what other products or initiatives do you have on the horizon for Redmond Salt?
So there's a lot more going on than I probably see, but we do have a line of really good, and they're all going to be really well sourced. One thing that I love about Redmond is you can actually trust that we're going to try to do the most clean and natural and simple thing there is. So we're going to source our products from the most clean sources we can. So we have like seasoned salt that's way better than the seasoned salt you buy at the store. We have an electrolyte, the Relight drinks that are natural. I always tell people it's like drinking a Gatorade without all the garbage in it, only the way that nature wanted you to have an electrolyte drink. We have things like smoked salt. We have about everything you can think of about with the products, our two products that we have naturally occurring in our area, the salt and the clay. Those are the two products we have. We have facial creams, we have all sorts of things, which we could do a whole podcast on clays and stuff like that. So that's kind of what's going on there. On our ag side, we're actually working on seeing how we can work with helping people raising chickens. That's our next thing we're really working on because a lot of people raise chickens and we want to make it so they can get our minerals simple and easy into their chickens. So that's kind of where our next step is on the agriculture side.
That's awesome. Do you already have minerals for livestock?
Yes, yeah.
You
So
do.
we've
Okay.
had mineral for livestock, like I said, since '58. That's when we started doing livestock salt. So we have things like, if I give you just a brief introduction, how I would tell you to, because this is the most common question I get. I've been here 5 years. Most people call and say, "What minerals should I give my animals?" And it's a broad question: what species, what kind of pasture. So I'll give you my quick and dirty how to tell and how to make it simple and to cut out all the BS on how to choose minerals. So, what I would say is if you have good green grass, Redmond salt is probably going to be pretty close to enough, especially if you're feeding something like kelp and Redmond salt. That's a great mineral mix. Okay. We also have one with garlic. So if you're fighting flies and you do not want to use pest controls or anything like that, the garlic works really good. And the other cool thing is you can feed it to your family milk cow and it will not taint the milk. Like I said, we feed it to our dairy cows and they never taints the milk. So if you have good green grass, that's what I recommend. Some of us know though that we have an area that might be deficient in selenium or copper or just normal trace minerals that are deficient. So we have one called selenium 90 that I would feed if you know that you're deficient in that. And then my other one is if you are worried about what your mineral is because you have probably poor grass or you started feeding dry hay or something in the winter, we have specially formulated minerals for. We have one called sheep wheat, and we get really crazy with our naming of things. We have one called sheep mineral, one called goat mineral, and one called beef mineral. Okay, so we just go crazy and get really really crazy on our naming. So that's what I'd recommend if you're feeding dry hay or have poor quality forage, which you'll learn that when you learn more about animal husbandry, you can start telling when they're deficient or looking at their actions. And what I've found is that takes care of almost every mineral problem that people are having. Most mineral companies, if you compare a Redmond bag of livestock supplement compared to like big name feed companies, you'll see, wow, they have a whole bunch more mineral. And that is because they get money by selling you a whole bunch more mineral, and your animal's not really using it. It's not really in forms that's available to it. So you're just making really expensive manure and urine. So we've kind of formulated all those with using natural nature in mind and being balanced and using proportions.
So with the Redmond minerals and amendments, do you have different sizes that you sell so that it's not just for those that have hundreds or thousands of acres?
Yeah, so we have, if you want to buy online, so if you can't find a Redmond dealer near you, the best way to go online. We only had 5 pounders, but now we have 25 pounders online, which is way more affordable. So if you have, 5 or 10 head of cows, or you have goats or chicken, the 25 pounder is going to be way more efficient than the 5 pound bags. So we have those. If you have a feed store or a Redmond dealer, which you can go to find a store on redmondagriculture.com, then we have 50-pound bags and you can buy totes. If any of you guys want a full semi-load of bulk salt, we'll sell that to you also. but but yeah, so 5, 25, 50, and 2,000 pounds is how you get it. And then but those are kind of the online though. You can only get, because once you get to 50 pounds, you cannot ship something affordably. So the 25 pounds is online and the 5 pounds online.
And so where can we learn more, or where can our viewers learn more?
So go to redmondagriculture.com. We have really good blogs. So if you have questions about minerals, or you listen to me and you're like, man, that guy rambles, let me just go read about something, just go to redmondagriculture.com and you can buy some 5 and 25-pound products there. I believe you guys have a code if you want to share that.
Yeah, I was just going to hop in. If you use the code Good Soil, GOODSOIL, you'll get 15% off.
Perfect. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that'll get you a good discount on it. And if you need more than that, then the best way is to go find a store, on the find a store. But you can, even if you're like me and you can't remember anything, you can sign up to subscribe. So every month it ships you a 25-pound bag or something like that. And that's where you can find out any details. You can actually chat. If you put chat, you'll chat with a real person, not a bot. You'll chat with, you can even say hi, Drew, if you're chatting. So say hi, Drew. And, but you can talk with a real person, or you can contact us. If you need to talk to me, they can get you and talk to me. We will make it work, but you're going to talk to a real person whenever you're talking to us.
Yeah, you are a wealth of information, Karson. Thank you so much. And you are also speaking as well. When's the next time you're going to be speaking?
I think it's going to be the Homestead Festival in Tennessee. I don't know the dates. I'm so bad with dates. So I don't have my phone, or I'd look, but the Homestead Festival is the next one I'm speaking at.
Do you have any links for yourself then, Karson, if they want to?
So yeah, if you want to look me up, I actually have a small YouTube. I just started it. It's called The Rip Ranch.
Yeah, I did see
RIPP
this.
ranch. Yeah, the
Mhm.
Rip Ranch. I just started it, very small, and I do some teaching, and then I also show me doing some cowboy stuff, which people like more than me teaching. I found people love to see me chase cows. So
That was me. That's
yeah,
me.
yeah, it's okay though because it's fun. So I just started doing that. Those are the main places you can find me.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Karson. You are, like Tim said, a wealth of information, and we would love to invite you back for part 2.
Oh heck
And I'd
yes,
love to talk more about clay. There's so much there that I'd love to learn, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners would like to as
oh,
well.
that'd be great. I'd love to come back on.
All right. Thank you, Karson.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.